So thank you all for being here today. I think you've all been at least at a couple of the sessions now. So some of this is, you know what we're here for, which is nice. My name is Melissa. I think I've met all of you now. I'm the manager of governance and elections here at the USC, and this kind of campaign school thing has been my baby for the last month and a half. I am in London, Ontario. So for me, I don't know where all of you are at right now, but that means that I am on the traditional territories, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Audouindered peoples. So if you look at a map of the area, if you're not from London, you'll see that kind of to the south of the city, you'll find the Oneida Nation of the Thames, Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, and then a little bit further, kind of south and west, is the Munsee Delaware First Nation. Maps. I used to really love cartography as a kid. I was a nerd. I fully own it. But what I didn't kind of understand until I was quite a bit older was that maps are really just like colonial representations of the world. They're a way of kind of exercising control over land that didn't belong to European settlers. And so all maps, including the ones of this area, are really...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm driving.
All good. Are all just kind of historical records of displacement, basically. Those communities south of the city, people didn't just like magically decide to live there. They were moved into that space. And I think if we're doing land acknowledgements, it's important to acknowledge how and why the land looks the way it looks, and why communities look the way they look, and why we are all here in different places. So I've been thinking about what to say beyond kind of the where we are and whose land we're on, because I do think it's important to do more than just name the territories. And I think it's just my kind of reflection as I was thinking about this today was that how... It's okay, Emily. My internet's gone down twice today. How land acknowledgements really came into public use. Because I'm gonna guess that I'm a solid decade at least older than all of you. And land acknowledgements were not a thing in my experience. Like, we didn't do them at school. We didn't talk about that. It wasn't something in university that was something that was ever part of our classes. It really wasn't until probably 4 or 5 years ago that I started to hear them with any kind of regularity. And they really started out as almost like a novelty, and very, very, very quickly became a checkbox item. Like, you didn't do a land acknowledgement, you were doing it wrong, but like the land acknowledgement was just list it, yes, we're done. And people struggled with pronunciations, and there wasn't a lot of intentional focus on it. And so I think one of the things that we have to be careful of in student leadership positions, or any kind of leadership positions, or spaces where we're trying to be supportive of others, is like, don't create checkboxes, don't create opportunities to tokenize people, because that's really what it is when it's a checkbox. So this is not my most articulate or eloquent land acknowledgement by a long shot, but I think it's still important to think about why we do a land acknowledgement and what it means, particularly when you're like a white lady like me, and how to make sure that when we do this kind of thing, that it's actually meaningful, and that it's not just because we think we have to. So I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna share my screen now. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. I too am having computer issues. There we go. All right. So the building a platform. So we're all here today because we want to figure out in a little more detail how to build an effective platform. Matt and Victoria are both here. They've got lots of experience. If you have pretty much any position that you might want to run for and build a platform for, between the two of them, they can speak to it. So I will give them a chance to introduce themselves. I've already talked about myself. I know Mark is here too, if you want to jump in.
Cool. I guess I can start off. Yeah. So I think it's four now, attendees as far as I saw. I think you have been along with these sessions for a few of them. I think these are all familiar faces and names. But one more time, my name is Matt. I'm the current USC president this year. I have ran 2 elections, one with or campaigns, I guess I should say, one with like a proper platform, one with a pretty modified one, being when I ran for counselor, which is just like I went a lot more minimalist there. So yeah, experience there, obviously a lot of consultation and everything there. As I said right at the beginning, I really hope in any of this that we're doing today that like, if there's also just questions you want to stop us on, even if it feels kind of like nitpicky platforms or something that are this really like difficult to conceptualize thing where there's not always a whole lot of information on what they are and how they can be created. So do not hesitate to ask and stop us and ask questions along the way. I just want to say that one piece because I really want to hammer that home. But yes, hello everyone. My name is Matt and I will go to Vic.
Awesome. Hi everyone. I don't think I know everyone on the call, so I'll introduce myself and my kind of journey through elections and campaigns. So currently I'm the Vice President University Affairs for the USC. But I can give you a little brief overview of my elections experience. In my 4 years at Western, I've run in 6 elections. 4 of them were at large. So I ran in a USC counselor election when I was, so at the end of my first year, I ran to be a counselor. At the end of my second year, I ran for re-election in that role. And then at the end of my third year, I ran to be the president of the Science Student Council. And then at the end of my 4th year, I ran against Matt to be the USC president. And then and I was the first woman, to run in that election for at least 5 years because nobody had run in like kind of the span of my university career. And then after that, I ran in an internal election within the university students, like the actual council itself, for the role that I'm in right now. So I've run in a number of other kind of elections, and the reason why I say this is because I don't want to assume what people are running for here. You could be here because you're interested in running for USC president, or you could be here because you're interested in running, as a department representative in your council or something like that. So I have a lot of just elections experience in general. I've run at a lot of like smaller levels as well, so like even within councils. I ran to be an USA delegate as well within the USC. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of my experiences. I've run at both internal and at large elections at a number of different scales over a number of different years. So I'm happy to kind of provide my perspective, but I also think it's important when we talk about elections, not for this session specifically, but in general, it's important to talk about kind of what goes into, obviously building your campaign and your platform and building up to actually running in an election, but also talking about like what it's like to lose elections. And I mean, I ran every year for like 3 years to be an USA delegate before I actually got it. So I think that's also important to talk about as well. I'm happy to kind of share my experiences in any of my kind of elections, but that's a bit about me. And I'm happy to speak about my role at any point as well. I guess I'll pass it to Mark if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm here as a support if there's any questions, and I'm here to grill the 2 presenters. So I'm Mark. I'm VP of Finance for the USC. I just have a lot of policy experience, so if you have any questions about like writing like policy specific stuff, I could probably help with that. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, our little our surprise guest. Okay, great. So I guess I can start on this one. So I guess in terms of about the series and what kind of it's about, I think all of you, I'm trying to remember if you've been to all the ones so far, because I think most of you have. But thus far, this entire series that we've been putting together, something that I think the entire executive, but I also know like very specifically like myself and Victoria felt extremely strongly about, and it's been spearheaded by the incredible Melissa, which has been so huge shout out. I'm going to pause there for a second, but but it was something that we felt really strongly about, that I feel like there's not always enough information out there for campaigns in general, in terms of it's just so nebulous and hard to actually dip your toes in to actually figure out how to start. So all these sessions have been earmarked to at least start to break down some of that confusion. So if you don't necessarily know where to start, who to talk to, what to do, we start to kind of bring that down. So that's, I guess, the main sentiment behind this. This one in particular, obviously, platforms are a critical part of what you'll be you'll be doing, kind of like in kind of getting your thoughts together, kind of who you're gonna identify as a candidate. There's so much there to kind of process, and it's a good tool. It's a lot of work, no doubt, because you have to write it down, and it's this big document. But it's something that does help you kind of get aligned in your head and kind of what who you are as a candidate, how you're going to kind of present to everyone. So I guess kind of with that said, that's the whole intent. And then I guess I can go to kind of that, we spoke about this for those of you who were at the kind of USC 101 that Jeff, Mark, and myself were running. We kind of went way deep into the whole organizational aspect of the USC, the kind of depth of how we operate, what we present, what we bring. But we just wanted to swing this. It's also always fun to talk about these anytime we possibly can to students. So vision, mission, values, you can obviously read all that's there, but it's something that we want to show to, because it's also, if you're looking for some sort of USC role, or I'm sure these do permeate across any number of faculty roles, or within an affiliate role as well, whatever it may be. But yeah, the vision is something that I know Jeff had said yesterday or 2 days ago, whenever it was, that it was something that was a more recent thing in the most recent kind of strategic plan that we created. But I truly do believe that statement, and it's something that I do hope that you, running for whatever role it may be, to some degree believe as well. And that's probably why you're here today. So those are something that we love to just get to speak to as much as we can, make sure they're in front of students, because it's in the giant kind of above the pictures in the front hallway that we walk in every day to come into work with the big statement. So so I will move on from there, and we will go to Victoria to just kind of kick off the actual kind of content of this entire session.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about in this session, obviously, what a platform is, how to write one, what it means with respect to your campaign and the context that you'll use it in. As I mentioned kind of at the beginning of the session, there are a series of briefs that the USC is going to be releasing after this series, the whole campaign school series, is over as well. So I wrote the session, or the brief, on how to write a platform, and this kind of walks through the different steps of that, but also just so you know that we'll be releasing something that you'll be able to reference afterwards, so you don't necessarily have to take down a bunch of notes. We're going to talk a little bit about like what a platform is and why it matters. Now that you have a general sense of like how to start planning your campaign, now that you know a little bit more about what the USC is and does, it's important to put that on paper and to show students kind of who you are as a candidate, and what you stand for, what you believe in, and what you hope to accomplish in the role that you're running for. So your platform is essential for any campaign for the reasons that I just mentioned. It's pretty hard to vote for someone when you have no idea kind of like what they're planning to do, how they understand the role that they're going to get themselves into. So it's where you can outline these things. You can talk about yourself. You can talk about your goals, what you think is good about, the organization, club, or council that you want to be a part of, and maybe what you think can improve. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through the session. But it's a really big reference point for a lot of voters. And so it's important that as you do this, you kind of clearly lay out these things. You like have to think about them clearly for yourself, but then also presenting them in a way that's articulate to students so that they can understand that as well, and they can vote you into the position that you're running for. So I guess we'll get into it.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I'll take the kind of where to start. And as I had spoken about, it's one of those things that I remember right at the beginning, it's so difficult to actually get your feet under you and start moving and start kind of running towards whatever it is that your goal may be. And so I guess the kind of questions that are present there are things for you to consider in terms of the way that you can start moving. There's definitely going to be, I think in any time I've spoken to people who've considered running, what I think is really important for you to think about is the why. The why are you running? Why are you here? Why do you think you're gonna play a role, be different in whatever position it may be? And that I think is something that will really, really drive you towards being a successful candidate, period, but then also creating a successful platform, as it's something that will really help you kind of dictate what you're trying to focus on, how even as more detailed as how it may look, how it may communicate, because it'll all play into this kind of collective vision of why is Matt running for this position, and what is he trying to convey. It's also important too that, like, to the second point, what's going on in the world, I think it's really important to think about, as much as, yes, like to kind of current events of the globe, obviously we have one that is very important that will dictate almost everything you're probably considering right now, being COVID. But also to really, the biggest thing too is to think about our campus. What are the hot topics? What are students caring about? What do they want to, like what do they want to see addressed? And how do you align with that? How do you play into that? So those are also really critical things to consider in order for this to be a kind of up-to-date, timely document that people will want to read and want to engage with. And then I guess, so the final one, this is probably one of the biggest pieces, and just if I can give kind of personal experience, consultation is one of the biggest pieces of platform building. For me, I didn't really know, I'd never done a platform before. I didn't really know how it all started, but for me, consultation was that domino that started my entire kind of effect moving forward. Once you start talking to people, once you start listening, you can start to kind of build out what's the issues. You'll have notes, I'm sure, of what you've wanted to see changed, what you have heard or felt, but it's critical to understand what other people feel. And maybe it aligns with what you've heard, but maybe it's completely different. And those are really, really important things for you to keep in mind as you're doing this entire process. It can be a lot of time, but it's really important. It was something that was, like, obviously exhausting, but was also one of my favorite parts. I got to meet so many new people from new clubs and faculties and anything along those lines that I felt really helped me kind of create a document that I know I'm sure you've read in, like, every platform ever. They're like, this is, like, it's weird saying this is my platform, but it's really about you, or like all that kind of stuff. And, like, as much as that is a cliche, it's true, because you do feel that, like, I'm right, like, this is, like, from what the community is built, but, like, I know it's a cliche that I even use on mine, so I admit to that. But I will say that is genuinely how it will feel, and that's why I did write it, because you feel so much that you've been able to collect so many voices, and that is truly what it means. So I guess, yeah, I can also because, like, Victoria's obviously done this many times too. There, as I said, like, I can go on and on about the consultation piece. It's critical, but Vic, do you want to add anything there as well?
I think, I don't know. I think you said most of it. I would just say with the consultations, sometimes that helps. Like, obviously it's important to, like, look to yourself first and think about what motivates you. What have some of your experiences been? Maybe you're angry about something, or you had a bad experience with something, and that's what's motivating you to be in a role. Or maybe you had a really good experience with something and you want to contribute to that and continue it being good. Like, not everything has to be about solving problems. And honestly, your platform should probably strike a balance between, saying positive things and things you want to improve, and, being critical about things as well. And I think with consultations, or I think as you're going through this, like, sometimes that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to be like, I have to come up with all these ideas. I know for me, like, I'd been involved in a lot of different things. And then at the end, when I was like, I know I could be, good at this role. I think I could potentially win an election. But, like, I don't have 1,004 ideas. Like, I don't know if I can come up with all this by myself. And I think that's where consultations help to get the ball rolling, to Matt's point. You can bring some of your ideas to the table. You can ask people similar questions. If you were frustrated about something, ask people the same thing. Say, like, were you frustrated about this? Like, what was your take? And you might learn things, right? I can always guarantee that you'll learn things through consultations. And that's where a lot of some of your good ideas will come from, is learning from different students. And I think especially if you're running for a large scale role that represents a pretty diverse group of students, it's also important to consider experiences that are not your own as well. If you're running for, like, a faculty or like a more specific role that you maybe have some more experience in, maybe that's less of the case. But also, even within that, like, everybody's a little bit different. And even lived experience is a component of that as well, where you want to make sure that you're talking to students and being representative of what the holistic student experience looks like, and how you could potentially impact that, either to improve it or to fix some of the things that are maybe negative about it in the role that you're running for. So that's the only other thing I'll add. And I can jump to the next slide and start about what to do when you start writing. So now that you kind of looked within yourself, had a bit of self-discovery, and you're like, this is it. This is what I want to run for. This is what I believe in. I've done some consultations. I'm feeling pretty good. I want to start writing this document. So some important things for you to maybe consider as you start to write the platform itself is you want to like introduce yourself. Your ideas and your platform shouldn't be separate from who you are as a candidate. They really should be not like one and the same, but they should be pretty interrelated. And it's okay to talk about yourself on your platform. A lot of candidates will do like an opening letter or kind of like a statement at the beginning. You can include whatever it is that you want, really. But I think it's important to show students that you're human and that you are also a student. I think a lot of times there's kind of this misconception with like student politics, especially if you've been in it for a while, but also if you're running that, the average student like doesn't relate to these roles, and they're like, well, you have to appeal to the average student. So I'm not saying you have to, say like, I go to the spoke like you, and I, go to class like you. But at the same time, you do want to appeal to students at large, especially if the role that you're running for is on like a larger magnitude. You want to just show who you are a little bit. You can share some of your experiences. A lot of people will share other leadership roles that they've had, or their program or whatever. So you can do those kinds of things to kind of appeal to the general student body, because relatability really does matter. If we look at some of the larger student leadership roles, a lot of them come down to popular vote. So you want to make sure that to an extent, you're staying true to who you are, but to an extent you're being relatable as well. And you're also appealing to different student perspectives that you may not, have super close ties to. The second thing that you're going to want to consider is the feasibility of your ideas. So there are like kind of two different components to this. When you come up with things, either through your consultations or through your own ideas, you're going to want to like kind of look into what those things are and how you would potentially make them happen. It'll help you during the election when people ask you, this thing on your platform, like, how is that going to work? I didn't know that was possible. How fast do you think you'd be able to get that done, or whatever, things like that. It's important for you to do some of that background research, or maybe have some of your team help you in doing some of that background research, so that you understand when you're questioned, either in interviews or by students, how you would actually go about making some of those things happen. At the same time, you do want to be ambitious and optimistic with the things that your goals and what you're hoping to do in your role. So not everything has to have like a regimented plan of how you're going to get everything done. And you can be optimistic about things, but it's just something to consider, the feasibility of the ideas that you're presenting. And then you just have to make some strategic decisions about, what you include, what you don't include based on that. And there are different ways that you can investigate feasibility. You can do that by consultations again. So the USC executive is a really good resource. Potentially the person who's currently in the role that you're running for would be a good resource to ask about, is this thing possible? Have you tried this and did it work? Yes or no? Why? Maybe it can be attempted again, just in a different approach. Or there are lots of like resources and documents that you can refer to as well. I know even last year, the university has a sustainability plan that they released in 2012. And so you look at it and you look at their long-term sustainability goals, and they're not even close to being reached. So you look at those things and you say, okay, how am I going to present my sustainability goals in the context of, the university's not achieving the goals that they've already set? Like, so that context is really important to how you frame your ideas, and can potentially provide some insight into how you would go about doing those things. And then the last point that I put in here was to connect the dots for students. I think a lot of times what we're expecting of you, or what the student body is expecting of students in these elected leadership roles, is to basically tell them what they don't know they need. So, if you in your consultations are talking to students and they're like, I'm frustrated about academic counseling, academic counseling's, not good, or there's long wait times, or maybe mental health, there's long wait times, or it's not good quality or whatever, then that's kind of where that feasibility piece comes in, where you and your team investigate the feasibility. You kind of take your own ideas, your consultations, and you connect all the dots together. And that's how you present that idea on your platform, by saying, I've heard from students that X, Y, Z are the problems. and then you kind of present to them why you in this role or your solution that you've come up with or your course of action is going to address that concern that you know exists from the conversations that you've had with students. So I think that's it that I want to say on this, but I don't know, Matt, if you want to add anything before we move on.
No, I think that, yeah, I think that's all pretty clear. I guess I wanted to pause too, because I think the next one is called things to check. But I guess what I wanted to check first is how all that is receiving in your brains. And I guess I wanted to pause to see if there are any questions, comments, anything, because like I know where there's a lot of information that we want to kind of throw so that you're hearing it and you're processing, but I wanted to stop here just to see if there was any questions or of anything we've talked about. And as I said, nothing is too small and totally fine if not.
If you have questions, you can just unmute yourself and then you don't have to use the hand raise thing.
Yeah, Haley.
Yeah, I totally agree to Vic's point. Like, there's often this like disconnect between students that are running for like leadership positions and then like the majority of students, and like being in like a very small faculty where we have like a low voter turnout. Like, do you have any advice like this year with engaging with students, just to make them feel like you are that like representative student? Like, for context, like I did like almost 20 hours worth of consultations, but even with that, like I still feel like I'm not representing all the students, and I don't know how to like say that without being like, oh, I did like 20 hours of consultations, I'm like so good, like, you know, like it's a hard message to convey to students without sounding like you're being cocky or you're being so pretentious, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I know like I think it's all a matter of like approach and how you choose to frame yourself as a candidate and your like brand almost. Like I know people who in their campaigns have said like, I've done X many consultations or X many hours of consultations, and to your point, that could be perceived in a couple of different ways. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. The other thing you like, and it's again, it's a kind of a decision of approach, is you could say like, I've done a bunch of consultations, but I know that like, especially this year, it's really difficult to like reach the entire student body. And like, maybe that's something you say, like, I want to like address this in like, if I am to be elected in this role, like, I know that this is a really difficult thing. And like, maybe it kind of ties into like connectivity is a really big issue with COVID. How can I, in this role that I'm running for, like help to improve that within the faculty? Because even in running for this role, I found it to be really difficult. And I think that's how you could potentially change that in your framing. To your point about like understanding the student body kind of prior to the election. I don't know what I would like give in terms of advice. Unfortunately, where my like breadth of elections experience doesn't apply is in the middle of a pandemic when all the rules change.
Yeah.
But I think, if there are ways, if you know of kind of niches within your faculty that you can maybe reach out to, or like maybe it's a matter of talking to like your current executive, maybe it's a matter of, talking to kind of those individual students, maybe it's using forums. The other way is, your consultations don't always have to be formal, like one-on-one sit-down conversations. You can do more like group things. You can also do it more informally. Like I know when I was running for certain roles, I would just kind of like keep a notepad of like things that I heard in different settings. It doesn't always have to be, I want to sit down with you so you can pour your heart out and tell me everything that's wrong. It can be like, oh, in a group chat, somebody mentioned that like this was like really frustrating for them in a topic that's like totally unrelated to elections, but something that could be applicable to potentially you in your role. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think that's where I would maybe start. And then I think it's all about how you frame your brand as a candidate, and how I think especially this year you are creative in how you kind of present your platform material. We can talk about that as the session goes on as well, but I think the way that the platforms and candidate ideas generally this year are presented is going to have to be pretty different and probably pretty creative.
Thank you.
And if I can add to just a little bit for Haley, some of what you asked about as well. So I guess the first one too, I just wanted to share some of like my own experience too, that like at the beginning, it's hard to speak about yourself and being like, look, all this, like the stuff I did. And like, I talked to these people, like it feels really awkward. And I like was talking with former candidates about being like, how do you navigate that? And like, some people are cool with it. Like it makes them feel happy and proud and like that. And that's totally fine. But I think some of what you're getting at, Haley, is like, it's hard to kind of be like I worked really hard and I'm actually really proud of this. And this is why I'm saying all this kind of stuff. So like, I guess part of it is getting a little bit comfortable, because like in a way you have to, I don't use the word sell, but like sell kind of what you're providing and show people the value of it. So there is a bit of comfort that like, I remember that was something I had to kind of navigate myself through. The other thing too, that I think in terms of like, when you're like navigating how much to talk about, like, well, I did 20 hours and I'm proud of that. I think it's also acknowledging that no single human who goes for any of these roles will ever be able to speak to every single experience of every single student. Like it's just, that goes without saying. I know that's like everyone is aware of that, but I guess that's part of what brings so much value to consultation, is it allows you to at least get some insights and glimpses. So I guess that's part of like how you can articulate it and be like, well, I've never experienced life as a person living in Essex. So I wanted to reach out to the Essex Head Soft to find out what the kind of needs are there. Like just as an example, but I think that's part of it too, where it's kind of the comfort of talking about you, but then also being able to be like frame it in ways that kind of make sense as to like why you're doing what you're doing. So I thought that was a really good question, but I just wanted to pluck on some of like kind of how I felt and how I had felt it in previous years.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. And then I think I am continuing to talk for a moment, so my apologies for lots of Matt voice. But on this one, we want to check. So it's kind of things to kind of gut check yourself on as you're creating this whole platform. And I guess we've kind of said it in some pieces, but platforms, like, yes, there's like some styles and there's some things that do help it be effective. But a lot of it is personal to each like candidate. Like there's different styles. People have different experiences that they want to communicate things in different ways. As has been alluded to, like during COVID, it might have to be a little bit more of an interactive document or something like that. Like people can get creative with how they're going to convey all their thoughts and their ideas. But I guess the main thing too is that you want to make sure that whatever you're producing is digestible. There's going to be students who are going to comb that thing and know every single letter and word and punctuation, but there's also some that are just going to skim it real quick and just want to kind of get the general, they're going to read just the bullet points of like each title of whatever item it is. And that's totally fine too. But you want to be able to kind of play to both. You want to be able to kind of accommodate, and it's a lot of work. And as I said, not every single person will read it cover to cover, but it is still important to have it dialed in and well thought all the way through. But there's also things to think about too, like, is it kind of appealing to look at? Is there a fun image of you on the front, or is there good, like whatever your color palette might be, is it like engaging in that way? There's a lot of things to consider that make people want to read it, because it is really important to get as many people as you can, because then they're informed and they know who they're voting for. But it's also that I think to think about, especially in this new era, is that you'll have this kind of platform as like the base. And even within my experience last year running, what is a common thing that people do is they kind of peel out pieces of it and do single posts of each section and just kind of focus each day or at a certain period of time. So you can also use that platform as just like the kind of skeleton of what you're doing. It's the base. And then you can kind of use it and modify it and play around with it to provide social content, to give speaking points, to anything there. So I figured I want to go to that point. It's also like, we have the what does your team think aspect, but so it's like your campaign team and anything there, give them kind of eyes on it, see if it's reading smoothly, see if it makes sense. Because sometimes when you're writing, you can get so in your own head, you're like, yeah, this is so eloquent, this is dope, but then it may not to everyone else, and that's okay. But it's also like, maybe just send it to some of your friends too, maybe ones that aren't possibly as dialed in as you might be, in terms of like someone who's more engaged with kind of student government, politics, anything there, because that's a really important eye to have look at it. So I guess it's being open to the kind of different visions and perspectives that people might take while reading what you're doing is something to consider. And then the final one, as I kind of alluded to with like peeling parts of it off to like use for social content, is it going to be easy to find? Like, especially with COVID, something that's going to be definitely a factor to consider for you all is that in past years, like, yes, there's a lot of content on like Instagram and Facebook, but given that's going to be one of the common kind of grounds that everyone is going to be vying for, it's going to be super congested. There's going to be a lot of like noise there, and it's still important to like have some content for sure, but it's like kind of consider where people are going to locate this. Are they going to know how to find it, so that it can be digested, and so that it can be viewed and it can benefit you in any way possible. So I think that's kind of my thoughts there. And again, I can pause there to see like if anyone has questions or any points to kind of clarify, but then also Victoria or Mark or anyone who wants to add in, feel free. Yeah, to start on the first one. Are there any questions or anything from what I've said there to anyone here? Cool. And then Vic, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I just think on the second point, your team can be really valuable to you, both in helping you build your platform, informing what you put on your platform, but also hopefully your team is like representative of different either areas within your like faculty or within the campus. So if you give them your platform and they read it, they can give you feedback on it and say like, you know what, a student athlete who reads this is not gonna resonate with this point, or you know, someone in a different faculty, or you know, someone from a sorority or fraternity, you know, we're not a fan of the way you phrase this thing, or that doesn't really make sense to me. And so that can be a really helpful exercise for you to bring it to your team and for them to give you some feedback. If you have some like trusted friends in different areas as well, you can also like run it past people. But it's generally to kind of give you a sense of, you know, how it will be received by students as well, which is important. Cool. Okay. I don't know, Melissa, do you want to run this part and then I can jump in on just some other things to consider afterwards?
So we're actually just going to do a little bit of practice. So if you are a pen and paper person, grab a pen and paper. If you're not, open a tab. Give you a minute to do that. And what I want to do, we've talked kind of about where to go through this, like how to start. One of the things that's really, really important with a platform is to know what your values are as a candidate, because those are the things that you're not going to compromise on. So if it's really important to you that your campaign is, you know, inclusive, then that needs to show up in every one of your platform points. If it's really important to you that you as a leader are going to be accessible, and that's something you're going to bring to the role, how are you going to have that show up in your platform points? So the other thing, it's not just about kind of consistent internal logic, which is that, you know, if you say you're going to do one thing, if one of your things is a value, you don't want to be contradicting that somewhere else. It's also about, you know, who are you as a person? Who are you as a human being in this role? Because Vic talked a little bit about being relatable, and that's really important. And one way to explain who you are is to talk about your values. So there's different ways you can do it. What I'm gonna ask you to do right now is just like identify like 4 or 5, write them down. You don't have to share them with us. It's more just for you in getting started. And write them down however you want. I actually have a document. I've never run for anything, so like kudos to all of you for being brave enough to do that, because that still terrifies me as a concept. But I do have a document that lives in my like personal drive that is basically a stream of consciousness. Like, here's how I want to approach leadership. Here's the things that I value. Here's, if I'm in a tough decision, these are the things that I'm gonna keep coming back to. And it's been really helpful for me in different leadership positions that I've been in to be able to say, okay, wait, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck here. What are my values? Go back to that, because if you know what those are, it's gonna immediately eliminate certain options because they don't align with your values, and it's gonna help you kind of figure out where to go with your decision-making process. I will pause for 30 seconds, just jot some things down. Okay. Next up, identify your key issues. If you, whatever role you want to be in, or you're thinking about running for, what is the one thing you want to accomplish? Like, just pick one. If you don't accomplish this thing at the end of your term, you're going to be really disappointed. Write it down. And what you can do with this piece is that's what you're building around. That's what you're like, everything else, sure, you're going to have more things than just that one issue. Most people, I mean, there are some single issue candidates out there. If you're a federal or provincial politics watcher, you'll see that. But for the most part, you're going to need more than one thing. But that's the thing, that thing that you're really passionate about is the thing that's going to probably connect really well with voters if you're able to talk to them in person or through Zoom or whatever, because your enthusiasm is going to come out. And so a lot of your issues, whatever else you do in your platform, consider building it around that issue. Like, we all know Matt Reeser cares about sustainability. We know that. That's the key thing that he talked about, even as we were doing kind of planning in the spring. That we kept coming back to that. So that's an important thing to know for yourself. The other thing, I don't know how many of you know this, most of you probably do. The USC has a strategic plan. You can find it on the website. We're not going to spend too much time on it right this minute, but it's a really good idea to check how your platform fits with the strategic plan. So think about the issues that you're really passionate about, and even just link it back to the mission, vision, values. So if you want to do something that doesn't fit with the values of the organization or doesn't fit with the mission or the vision of the organization, you sit in that for a minute and think about why it doesn't fit, and think about whether or not it's something that the USC or the role you're considering, maybe it's not the best way to go about it. Or maybe we need to change some of our mission, vision, values, and that's one of your campaign points. But just be aware of how those pieces fit together, because the way that we use those as an organization, the way that any organization uses their mission and vision and values, is as a decision-making framework. So if we are we want to start a new program, or we're looking at a new policy, for example, we need to make sure that that policy fits with our values. Like if someone brings a policy to council, for example, that is inherently like undemocratic or is going to disempower students, that's so far out of our mission and vision and our values, actually, that it just doesn't make sense for us to do that. So that's just as a piece there. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for coming. Someone has to pop out. So take some time to do that as you're doing your platform piece or as you're putting your platform together. I think that's it for this one. Vic or Matt, do you want to add anything?
I don't. I think you did a good job. I don't know if Matt has anything.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think this is a really good kind of practice, and in some ways, I think this was a better structured way than I did it. But before I like fully decided to run, I just like laid in my bed for a couple hours and just like, for me, it's the big question of like if I were to run, like why would I? And like, why do I think I'd bring something unique? And that's all kind of what like Melissa's been poking at with all these questions, which is, again, very well done. But it was just, I wanted to share too, that like in one way or another, you'll find your way to like get your brain kind of wrapped around everything. But, and it's also something that will continue to form for some time in terms of like, as you're speaking with people and understanding things better, you'll kind of create more and more of a cohesive vision of like what you actually want to do. Because where I was in mid-November to where I was the day before the campaign was set to start, I had to like, there'd been so much more that have come into my brain. I've like became a lot more focused. So any of these activities you can think of, I'm sure you can find like things online, Google, even like once you're like from like a campaign manager, someone there, sometimes they play great roles. In some of the campaigns that were very professional, let's call them, for example, like the Pratt Chang one, I know that their campaign manager had them doing like a variety of kind of exercises similar to this, as well as like pitches where it's like one that you can kind of think about is if someone were to ask you, why are you running? There's the 5-minute version, there's the 1-minute version, and then there's like the 30-second version. And if you can distill those 3, then you have a pretty firm grasp of why you're running and kind of like a very short where you have someone for a second, or if someone really wants some depth as to why you're there. So just a little tool that like I had heard about in my past that I thought was like pretty interesting, and not that it has to be exactly that, but just like kind of along that vein. And I think you all know what I'm saying there. So I will, we can press on to our next slide.
Awesome. So we're almost at the end, so we'll open it up to some questions. We have a little exercise at the end too that we can do to kind of walk through what this process might look like as well. But there are a couple other like structural things that I think are important to consider. So if we go to the next one, we can just go through them a little bit. So in addition to kind of the content of your platform, I think there are just a couple other things that you should consider when you're building it out, especially when you're looking at kind of those last couple points of like, is this digestible? Are students going to understand? How am I going to kind of frame overall what my vision is and what my goals are? So one of those things is the length of your platform. So this is a strategic decision that you need to make as a candidate as to how you're going to approach platform writing. Over the last number of years, and kind of as a byproduct of the slate system, USC election platforms have become pretty lengthy. So students have come to kind of expect really long platforms that kind of, you know, are all encompassing, that talk about everything, that, you know, are really detailed, and they're basically little booklets almost. But I think there are obviously pros and cons to doing that. You can have a bit more of a comprehensive overview of what you're trying to do. But when we talk about like digestibility, maybe it's not the most digestible to have a super long platform. I also think it's important to consider that, you know, most, if not all, of the leadership roles that you're running for would be only a 1-year term. And so I think, I mean, having been in these positions now, I can tell you that, you know, you come up with this whole long laundry list of things you want to accomplish, and then in the role, you know, things happen. Apparently pandemics happen. That was not one I saw coming. But you know, things happen, even like short-term issues come up that you'll have to deal with. And so then you end up with this big long list of things you wanted to do without kind of accounting for the things that will come up over the course of the year, or just kind of focusing on like your handful of major priorities rather than, you know, putting out like a whole big platform on everything. So I say this because it is a strategic decision. Students have come to expect kind of a long platform. So if you go for a more short, high level platform, you know, there's a chance that potentially the people that you're running against come out with really long platforms, and then maybe it looks, I'm not going to say what it looks like if it's good or bad, because I think that depends on your perception. But, you know, lots of people will put things on their platform just for the sake of having it on their platform, just so that students, you know that they care about it. But I think, and this is where it becomes strategic in like how you present yourself and how you present your campaign. You know, maybe you incorporate those things that are kind of standard practice into another component of your platform, and you keep the rest of it like pretty high level and like, you know, to like a handful of points. It's just, it's something that'll potentially make you stand out. I think maybe in a good way, but I think that's a decision that you need to make based on the context of your election, because I don't necessarily know what they all look like. But it's just, I think, something to consider, the length and the presentation of your platform. Does it need to have a lot of graphics? That's kind of up to you as well in the way that you present it. Definitely this year, something to consider, not just like how the document itself looks or like however you present it, whether it's on a website or whatever, but also how you balance, you know, a wall of text with maybe some visuals or just generally some graphics to make it more digestible. I think we touched on this a little bit already, how much consultation is enough. It may feel like you can never get enough consultation, and that might also be true. But I think there has to be kind of a threshold, and that's maybe something you have to decide among yourself and your team as well, is kind of like, at what point do you think you've, you know, become knowledgeable enough to kind of just decide that that's your platform. Also with the understanding that you're not going to be able to talk to every student. You're not going to get everything spot on. You're probably going to miss an issue or two. And you just need to be prepared for that in the election. And I think also, how much research is enough. So we talked about a little bit about feasibility, looking into some of those items. Like I said earlier, you're not going to be able to, cost out or plan out over the next year of your term how you're gonna make every single thing on your platform come to life. But I think as long as you have a reasonable understanding of what that might look like, that's something to also consider as well. So these are all kind of strategic decisions that you have to make. There is really no right or wrong answer, and it's not really something that, we can tell you should do this or you shouldn't do this. There are pros and cons to each kind of scenario. And I think it all depends on you as a candidate, your team, the scope of your election, and what you hope to do and how you hope to present yourself in your campaign. But definitely things for you to consider that are kind of outside the scope of just the content, but more around like the presentation and how you go about communicating your goals to the students in your election. I don't know if there's anything else to add.
I had two quick ones, or like relatively quick ones. First one for like this is kind of into like how long should it be? But as I'd mentioned, I think it'll be pretty important to think about the titles of each of your kind of like subsections or however you want to structure it, but it'll just make it easy for people to navigate. When there's like a hard copy that I would print out, people would just kind of flip through until they found one they were most important on. As I said, in more of a digital sphere, it'll be different for sure. But I think there'll be something to think about there in terms of the titling. There's like, in some structures, there's like sustainability heading, but then it's like, what are the subheadings of like the actual items? So just kind of keep that in mind as you're considering something there. The other thing too, this is more just specific, but it was something that did me in a little bit, was the word graphics just made me think of this. If you can get going on your graphics early, if you can like start playing around with just like images of like your name or like however you want that to be conveyed. That one was tight and it was tough for us to do. I didn't really know what I wanted and I had no experience with graphics, but it was something that like took way more work than I had anticipated. So I'd say just a word of advice is like, if you have someone available already to kind of help you pluck along with that, try and get that moving, because like your name will be the same as it will be for a while. So you can like mine was like I did like vote research, my tagline. So like it was like a V with an R kind of thing. If you have like a concept for that, maybe start plucking at that early, because then you can also use it throughout. It'll be used throughout your platform and your graphics and anything there. So that was just something from like a personal experience. It was kind of one of those last minute things. It took a lot of work from everyone. So earlier the better, over the break. So I just wanted to ward that as a bit of a heads up for you all.
So I think maybe what we'll do right now is we'll just pause for a minute and see if there are any questions on any of the topics that we've covered so far. So thinking about kind of getting started about your platform, how to actually write it, some things to consider as you're finishing it up, or just some other like structural pieces of advice. So if there are any questions on that, we can just stop here for a second. We do have one more slide, which is a bit of like a thought experiment that we'll go through to kind of help you understand maybe what this process would look like in the context of an individual. But we'll stop here in case anyone has any specific questions, and we can also loop back after that and open it up to more of a discussion or questions afterwards as well.
I have a question just to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on balancing like offering hope on your platform versus being realistic.
Do you want me to take that, or Vic, did you want to?
You
Okay.
Go ahead and start.
Yeah, I just didn't want to snag that. So that is a very good question. It's something that you kind of just, I think to what Vic said a little bit about some of the other pieces and like length as an example, it's a bit of a strategic choice. There's some people I'd spoken with had said, man, just put like a freshie on there and people will love it and it'll be great. But then others will see that and be like, okay, this is like, what's this guy talking about? He doesn't know, he is out of the loop, he's out of touch, and therefore I will not vote for him. So I use that example because I know that was used in past years. I believe it was Debrina and it didn't go very well. Sorry to use names, but like it was, it was one of the platforms that was used and it didn't go over too well and was criticized. So I guess like my maybe insight is just like, be optimistic and be like hopeful for what you hope to accomplish. And like, you can be ambitious and set goals, but obviously if it's going to be a glaring, like that there's no, like, we're going to have a space shuttle launch on campus. Like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Let's not talk about that, because then you look like you don't really know what you're saying. But I would say it's still beneficial to like be aspirational. I think people like to see a bit of vision and a bit of like ideation of like what you're wanting to see done. And while it may not also be exactly what you set out, if that's like a pretty big goal, if you can still kind of be about here, people will still kind of appreciate it. I think people will still like, they'll know that you're like, it conveys what you're trying to accomplish as a candidate as well. So I know it's a little bit of a fluffy answer, but I'd say like, you kind of have to just decide maybe some of your branding as well. If you're going to be that kind of like realistic, like, I know what's going on type candidate, that's great. But then you can also be a bit of a, like, we can do so much, like, here's what we can accomplish. They're just avenues, they're strategic decisions that you get to make. But definitely like a game and a balance to play with for sure.
I think part of it too is you just have to pick your battles. Like, figure out what it is. Like, if you want to be critical about something, figure out like what the things are that you really want to be critical. Because like on both ends of the spectrum, like, nobody wants to read a platform, and no one will resonate with a candidate who's critical of everything, who's like, I'm going to fix everything because everything's broken and everything's horrible. But at the same time, if you're like, everything's fantastic and I just want to improve on everything, they're going to be like, well, you don't know what's going on because clearly not everything's great. So I think you just need to pick your battles on like what it is that, like, if you were to actually be in the role, what would you truly want to go at and improve? And those are the things that you can be more critical of. And then I think, you know, picking up a handful of things that are good and that are positive and that you might want to keep or improve or things like that, that can help to balance it out so it doesn't seem too lopsided one way. And I think that's where some of the feasibility can help you be realistic in all of that. You know, when you're looking into different things, whether it's to be critical or to praise an initiative that already exists, in either direction, you can approach it in a way that's realistic, that says, based on kind of the information that I know and the context that I have, I think, you know, this should be improved because of X, Y, Z, or I think, you know, this is a good initiative, and this is how I'd like to build upon it in X, Y, Z ways. And that's, I think, where that feasibility piece can come in, and where you can hopefully be able to offer a bit of both.
I can add on the strategy piece of that if you want. I would say the big thing too is like, think about the context of the election. Most of them are first past the poll, or not first past the poll, ranked ballots. So if you're thinking of something that's going to criticize a certain group, you need to be conscious that you might start ostracizing another portion of the group that might be voting for you second. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're doing your platform points, is you don't want to like specifically like point something out that might be an issue for another group. And then you're going down a road of who's voting for who's the number one, you're dividing it more. So another point for the candidates, I'll ask you guys, or sorry, Vic and Matt, I'll ask you a question. So if you were to have, let's say you're obviously a lot of the time in USC, our platforms are very similar. You have very similar points. You have very similar goals. So how would you approach a question about why you have the same platform point as another candidate? And how would you like maybe gauge you being a better platform, or you like having this conversation? I know you don't have to ask specifics, but I'm just curious on the.
Mark, you're putting us on down memory lane here.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question for those two people.
Yeah, for anyone who, yeah, there was comments of that in a past life. I don't know, Vic, do you want to take it, or do you want me to take it?
You can start, and I'll follow up.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, so like, I guess it's a very good question, as I will buy myself time with the classic politician way. No, I guess to answer that directly, I think there's going to be things that will definitely overlap, especially with certain years and certain social situations that are occurring. There's going to be things that have to be addressed, and there's going to be things that, yeah, maybe you might have pretty similar responses and reactions as other candidates. But while that is true, I think there's still, even in that similarities, there's going to be different approaches. There's going to be different priorities in terms of like what's going to come first, things along those lines. So I think when you're criticized that way, like, again, it probably will happen to some degree because like there's like files that will be discussed. And if you're all taking stances on sustainability, yeah, like they're gonna be like, oh, everyone like is just focusing on sustainability. But if everyone feels like that's like a big point, then that's great and that's their choices. But I think it's also like everyone will, especially as you're starting to see the candidates come out, you'll be able to decide some of like where your kind of niche is and like what your kind of branding is going to be. And some of it may just be you came in blinders on, you're going to run exactly the way you're going to run. Like I knew when I was coming in, I'm like sustainability, like that's pretty much one of the main reasons why I even consider doing this. So regardless, like I'm going to hit this with a hammer, and that's the way I was kind of going to go. But when you also see other candidates and maybe what they're focusing on, you can be a little bit more strategic to play off what they're maybe doing. So you can kind of find like your kind of gaps and where you want to focus. I will say it's frustrating too. And I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I'm seeing Vic nod. So I'm feeling this is fair when that all comes out, because like, like as a candidate who's written and you've read the other ones, there's differences, but on the surface, if people are just doing like a cursory scan, people may put that criticism. It's part of that whole experience of being a bit thick-skinned and just kind of pushing on. But yeah, I think it's like, no matter what, there will be differences and you will be able to kind of speak to that, but don't let it get you angry or upset. Just kind of like, yeah, like I understand, but here's the differences. So it's a tough one. Mark loves stirring the pot there. But yeah, Vic, do you wanna go?
Yeah, I'll just say that it comes as no surprise to me when platforms look similar, because candidates, first of all, if you're in touch with the issues that are relevant to students on campus, you probably should have similar kind of focuses of your platform. You know, if a platform doesn't mention COVID this year, like you're probably not writing a good platform if you're not in touch with what the issues are. And I think also when we talk about consultations, like, you know, everybody has slightly different social circles, but there are also, I would say, traditionally, you know, leadership roles that students want to consult with. All the students are going to be consulting, or if you are not, you probably should consult the USC executive who's running for a USC position. You should get a sense of, you know, what's going on within the USC, and how the different portfolios are operating. Maybe you're going to, you know, reach out to certain club presidents or affiliate presidents or whatever, like certain candidates, or most candidates, I would say, would go through like a similar kind of list of people to consult. And so if you're consulting with similar people, you're naturally going to have similar ideas, or at least identify similar issues that need to be addressed. So I would say that part doesn't really surprise me. But I would say I would agree with Matt that it is frustrating when you know that, you know, you have a different approach maybe to tackling a similar issue, but it's not being perceived that way. I would say what it comes down to as well is it really comes down to like individual, comes down to leadership style. Sometimes it comes down to experiences. And I don't mean like who has more experience, but I just mean like what kinds of groups or like leadership experiences you've been exposed to, because that will shape how you present your platform, and what kinds of interactions kind of shape the way you approach tackling certain issues. So I would say it's all in like the individual and how you articulate your plan, and potentially the knowledge that you have on certain things, because those experiences will inform, you know, maybe you have more knowledge on a certain subject because you were like a soft in a certain area or whatever, like, you know, that's going to change your approach. But I think what it really comes down to, in the way that you can differentiate yourself, is by like staying true to those values and goals that you set as an individual and that you're using to define your campaign. Because at the end of the day, like that's the part that's gonna carry with you, because it's who you are as a person. But I would say, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world that, you know, the ideas tend to be similar, because hopefully the topics that you're hoping to tackle are similar. But I think that's the whole challenge in running an election, is recognizing that you're going to have probably similar areas that you're going to try and accomplish and improve. But it's still making yourself stand out, even when you know that's going to be a likely fact. So, good question.
I'm going to throw in a hopefully less fraught question. Um, what was the hardest part of writing your platform?
Sorry, can you say that again, Melissa?
What was the hardest part of writing your platform?
I can go. I would say the hardest part for me was because I think our year, so I'll talk about the presidential election first. So the last year of the presidential election was the first year that the slate had been split up. And in my mind, that was a really difficult world to navigate because usually the president and VP ran together. So the advocacy kind of items and the VP or in the president kind of like strategic visionary items were all on the same platform. And so I was trying to figure out, where does that split now? At what point should the president's platform stop and the VP's platform begin so that one is not kind of impeding on the other? And I would say, to the earlier point about the strategic decision of platform length, like I chose to kind of approach it in more of like a strategic, like higher level way. I didn't want to have points on every single nitty gritty thing. So I think that was like, it was hard to kind of figure out like, how do you do that? How do you consolidate and make it shorter and like more broad while still like proving that you want to address all the things when, like undoubtedly somebody's going to come up to you and be like, well, why don't you have this thing on your platform? And it's like, well, I can only do so much in a 1-year term. And I think that's hard. It's hard when once you have all your ideas to kind of sit and either bucket them in a certain way or figure out like, what am I going to prioritize? There might be things that you don't include on your platform. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do them if you have the opportunity to, but it's just not something that you might run on. So I think that was pretty difficult. And then I think for the VP election, what's different is taking your ideas and like kind of being more siloed in like, what specific files you're likely to work on, so you can kind of frame them that way with respect to the things that people know you'll be working on, but then also kind of taking into account the recently elected president platform and how your ideas might interplay with those of the newly elected president, and kind of how as well, because you'll be elected at the same time, whether it's university affairs or external affairs, they're both kind of being elected at the same time. So you have to think about how your platform might apply to some of the other platforms of the elected people. I'm just speaking specifically to the USC. Maybe that's not as applicable at the faculty level. But yeah, those are things to consider. And then also just kind of like having to lobby on them to specific people rather than just like the campus at large.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess kind of for all of it, like it's a battle of just like putting everything on paper. I would say you've heard so much. Like I bought one notebook for it and it was just packed with stuff. And I had this weird system of like, if it was something that like I knew was like contributing to something I'd heard before, or like a point that I think I could make on its own, I'd write everything they're saying, but then star beside like those kind of points. But then like to actually sit down and like take all that and then like make it concise enough that it was digestible, but then also like actually get it done on time in terms of like having it out for right at the drop. I was also someone like I decided to run kind of in like right at the beginning of November. So it was a bit later. So I was like definitely scrambling totally just to get everything together and making sure that it was all up to snuff. So yeah, so I guess in terms of just getting it like actually dialed in, having it look pretty, having it look like no typos, everything right, like literally just the creation of the final product took a lot of work and a lot of effort from a variety of people to like proofread and as I said, graphics and image and all this kind of stuff. So I guess that was probably the hardest part. Like I liked the consulting. It was like tiring, no doubt. But it was interesting and it was fun. But the like writing itself was just like a bit of a slugfest, but it was obviously critical and like I'm glad I did it for sure.
Another question for the both of you. Did you do the bulk of the writing on your platforms, or did you have your teams help with that?
So Vic's laughing and I know why. When I did it, I made the decision to like, I wrote a fair amount of it, but I also did have help writing. I had people who I felt were good, like strong in terms of like some of the areas based on a lot of the consulting I'd done. But I did seek some help on there. As I said, we were getting tight on the timeline, and I wanted to ensure that it was done. It was done properly, and there's areas that I felt like people could definitely do. I took a final comb to it in terms of like, it was all in like the voice that I wanted. And then I had a final person like who's on my team to like proofread in terms of like, when your brain's seen it so many times, you can miss things. So I had kind of her do a final one over comb, make sure it's all looking perfect. But yeah, I made that decision to like make it a little bit, to like have a team effort on it. But like all the ideas in terms of like what was happening was from consultation with both my team and with students at large. But I know there's laughter there because Vic found out that I did that a little bit ago. And yeah, but Vic, you go for it.
So I wrote all of my platform, not in like the least shady way possible. That's because I think for me, like I did a lot of the I did all the consultation, so I had all the context to write it. So I had people on my team that did kind of research on certain things. If I was like, I'm interested in kind of pursuing this thought or this idea, I need some more information, I need some more research to help support it. And I had obviously people look over it and kind of edit it, but the bulk of the writing and the ideation of it was something that I did.
I have a question. How should you approach running unopposed?
Well, I don't know. I guess I don't think either. Vic, you haven't done it either, have you?
No, I've never been acclaimed. But I think, I don't know. I think what you should do is you should run like you have an opponent. I think, at the end of the day, I don't think any election, and maybe Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no election where you're just guaranteed to win. There's always kind of a vote of confidence that you would still have to technically earn. And at the end of the day, that vote of confidence is still students putting their faith in you to be in that leadership role. So I think it's important for you to treat it the same way that you would treat an election and say, even though I'm not running against anybody, I still have the duty to kind of make students aware of what my goals are, what I'm hoping to accomplish, why I would still be good for this role. Like, just because there's no one individual that's contesting you doesn't mean that the student body isn't still going to question why you should be in that role. So I would run it almost like an information campaign. Like, I would just be like, hey, like, these are all the things I'm doing. You should still, vote for me as like a vote of confidence or whatever, however you want to phrase it. But I definitely wouldn't just like assume that you've won until that's happened.
Yeah, I guess short answer is just treat it. I'd say treat it like it's you have someone, you technically are still against someone being anyone but you, which is a really dark way to put it, but there is still technically opposition to you. So yeah, I'd say don't take anything for granted. I'm with that way on literally everything, even if it looks like a slam dunk. Never just put the foot off the gas. Always drive forward, like as if you've got someone right on your tail. Because I think students will notice if you start to seem presumptuous or just that you've assumed it. So yeah, good question though, Parker, but it's something that I haven't necessarily done personally. So, and I see Haley's got her hand up too.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, that was gonna be my question. Thanks, Parker. So yeah, sorry, my mom is vacuuming. Terrible timing. I guess like with running unopposed, or like no, like the likelihood of possibly running unopposed, like how can you maintain that student engagement? Because like Vic said, it's going to be a vote of confidence, but I feel like this year, I either anticipate that the voter turnout will be a little bit higher than last year or like significantly lower than last year. And I just feel like if there's like just one person running, it demotivates students even more because they're like, what is the point, right? And so like, how can you like help educate students and engage with students that like, oh, even though like there only maybe one person running, like still voting is important, and like attributing to the student politics and like student political atmosphere is like integral to like creating community and like creating change. Like, do you have any, like, I know neither of you guys ran unopposed, but like, if you were in that position in a pandemic, like what would your strategy be?
I think when you submit your nomination, like you won't obviously know, maybe you'll have an idea based on like word of mouth, but You won't know until the end of the nomination period, but by the time you're actually running in the election, you'll know how many people you're running against. So you'll know if you are actually running unopposed. And I think if that's the case, not that you have to like change your whole campaign, you shouldn't do that. But maybe like reconsider how you plan to engage with students. I would say a valuable opportunity there is to kind of frame it as like a feedback campaign and say like, you know, like not to the same extent, but like, looks like I'm going to be the representative. Like, you should give me some feedback because I'm likely going to be in this role. And I wouldn't phrase it like that, but I'm just telling you that's like kind of what the reality of the situation is. So, I mean, you could in a campaign where nobody's like really contesting you as a candidate, like maybe that's where you take that opportunity to talk about the election process and why it's important. You know, you help raise awareness about like the election in general and like what's going on. And you also like maybe not like open yourself up to criticism, but like ask for feedback, like ask, you know, what would you hope to see, and use that as a space to engage students. At least maybe that's what I would do, is try and engage with them like still, because I think to my earlier point, like you should treat it like you still have to earn their vote. And I think if that's the way you're going to approach it, then it should be like not no different, but like it should be very similar than running in a regular election.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in on that one?
Yeah.
So as the person who is responsible for making sure that elections happen and people vote and that democracy is upheld and all of that good stuff, I think one thing that is maybe an option is to really lean on that like democracy matters angle, and really lean on communicating the value of the position that you're running for. And maybe I think you can incorporate some of what Vic said as well, but reminding students that, and this depends on knowing your voters a little bit, because certain voters are going to engage very differently with those ideas than others. But definitely, you know, you might be running unopposed, but there are other candidates who won't be. And so reminding people to engage in the election anyways and engage in the process and pay attention to what's happening on campus and what's happening around them is going to make for a healthier election and a stronger kind of student democracy. And that is another angle that you can kind of play into in your communications. I'm going to say it. So I was trying to decide if this is too political a statement, but you can point to things that are happening around the world, like elections that are happening or have happened, and like how important it is that people stay engaged and that people, you know, are actively participating in this kind of process. And I think, again, depending on your voters, that might resonate quite strongly with some of them. And so I think it's a tactic to think about anyway.
I guess to the group, like, and just like, I'm just sensing a lull there. Like, not that I have to share like every comment, but like my question overarching is like, how has it been going if you've started, or like, is there anything like right off the bat that you're just like, I don't even know what to do here, or this is just a roadblock? Like, I don't know, just if anyone has any kind of like general comments they're willing to share. I know people are obviously probably want to be careful about like sharing too much, but like, so you don't have to say how it's going if you don't want to, but you can definitely just say like, I don't know if there's any like even little things, like there's nothing too small for this group to help address, but I just wanted to open that kind of little door for at least the back few minutes while we're still here.
I can talk. Yeah, I'm still personally struggling with, like, I know things that are happening in the university and how long it takes advocacy to happen. So, like, I just like morally find it hard to like lie to people and be like, I'm gonna make sure that divestment happens by 2022 and then know that there's no way that's happening. So yeah, that's a personal struggle. I don't know if you have advice on that, but that's where I'm at.
I guess kind of to Parker's point, like I'm also kind of struggling with that, like the balance of hope and realistic expectations for students. And I feel like a lot, like this year especially, like students are very angry, students are very fed up, students are feeling very disconnected, and it kind of puts this tone, it sets this tone of that like we don't really care anymore, and like the student politicians and like leaders on campus like aren't accomplishing anything. It's just like being a part of that circle a little bit more this year. I can see that I have more perspective on like what it really is like, and it's like trying to communicate that, but like also like not fulfilling that like USC stereotype, right? Of like, we care for you, like we're doing all of this for you, like believe in us. And then like them being like, well, like what are you really doing, right? It's like, I feel like this year has been really interesting because I've gotten involved in the USC and like figured that out, but also like I'm a pretty like regular schmegular. Like I wasn't involved in the USC. I had no idea what the USC was until like this year, until I became an associate and I got to like work with Cam and Callista. So yeah, I think it's also just like through consultations, I've just learned that there are so many things that like you as like one student do not know of. And so when you're running for a position, it can be quite strenuous to be like, okay, like I'm going to try and like represent all of you and like try and like showcase like all these things that are important that have let you down.
For the record, I really like regular schmegular. I'm just gonna poke at that for a second. But aside from that, yeah, no, I guess like just general like that is just a tough struggle for sure. Like, and I honestly, like I didn't have that same example because I wasn't necessarily directly as involved in kind of things that would give you really direct kind of quote unquote behind the curtain type of insights and things along those lines. So it's going to be something that you can definitely like, will probably have to navigate, but in some ways too, I'm sure it will serve you well in terms of just content, understanding, depth. Like there's a lot of stuff that it kind of, as with literally anything ever, it will be, there's pros and cons. And so I think it's like, how can you use it to your advantage rather than it be kind of something that takes away from maybe what you're trying to go for, just make something that really difficult. But I think, to be clear, I think that's fair to feel that way for both of you who shared that. But yeah.
The only piece I'll add to that is like, if it's something that's coming from enough students, it's something that matters. So don't act like it's not, like just because it's not realistic doesn't mean it's not something that matters and shouldn't be on your platform. Like if you're hearing it from every single student you consult with, like that's a sign that it should be there, even if you don't think, like coming from a student politics lens, that you think it's like possible, because it's something that's a priority. And like that's not like, you don't have to plan a campaign for a 1-year plan. You can plan a campaign for a 5-year rollout, and that's something you can set in your role, but you're not there to make the action happen within the year. If that helps, like on the realism kind of lens, because I think it's like, if it's a student issue, it's a student issue at some point. Like you don't have to act like it isn't if you can't get it done.
Snaps for that.
I don't really have anything else to add to that. I think it's just, I mean, we've said it already, like it's kind of just a strategic decision you have to make. I think those are just things like, I think before the election, it's important for you to think about all the things that are kind of conflicting in your mind. Like, I want to do this and I don't know if I can do that. And, because there are probably times where either in a debate or in an interview, they're going to ask you certain things. And I just think it's important in your prep, both like your mental prep and just your like, preparing to be asked about your campaign and your platform and things. It's important for you to be aware of like what those things are. I'm not saying you need to go out there and be like, I actually don't know if any of this is realistic, but I think it's important for you to have that realization so that you can navigate those questions and say that like, I'm working to understand, and that's why the feasibility piece of some of these things is really important as well, because if you take everything that you hear in consultations at face value, like you might also, people might also tell you like, oh, I want divestment to happen and it has to happen now. And you can't just be like, yep, I'm going to do that. Like you should look into that and say, okay, I'm realizing this might actually not be realistic. Like, let me take a couple steps back and figure out how I can maybe get to that same goal. And that's kind of the whole piece of connecting the dots is like, I've heard that this is an issue, I've looked into maybe how it should happen. I don't really know if it can happen the way that it was recommended to me, but like, this is maybe the way that I think it could happen. And I think that's kind of how you can reframe and address some of those like internal conflicts that you might be having, but also address the like larger issue. That's what the whole like connecting the dot piece is about.
So I don't want to cut anyone off, but it is 2:59. So I think I do know that people may have to run. If there are any other questions, you can always send them my way and I can triage them to the right person. Or I think Matt and Victoria have both said at different points. I'm sure Mark probably feels similarly. You can always just email them. And Mark is shaking his head like, no, don't email me. Otherwise, I'm just going to skip ahead a couple of slides just to put the timeline up here again. We do have a couple more sessions coming up at the end of next week. Mark will be back to deliver a presentation on governance, help you understand the policies and bylaws, all of that good stuff. And then we'll dive into the elections rules specifically on Friday. So if any part of like the rules is intimidating you or making you wonder if you should run, please come to that session. The CRO and DRO and I will all be there to hopefully demystify anything there that needs demystifying. And otherwise, as with all of the sessions, these will be online in the next little bit, recorded all of them. We've got a fun new elections website coming up where you'll find all of these, plus some information about what COVID is going to mean for elections and any form that you might need, it'll all be there. If you said that you wanted emails from us about this, I will send those out. I'll send out a feedback form as well, just so that we can make sure that these are actually useful sessions for you. We did a much different version of this last year. We've changed it up quite a bit this year. So we just want to make sure that it's useful and that we're not, asking people to come to things that aren't what they expected. So any last thoughts from Vic, Matt, Mark, anyone else who's still on with us? Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. And hopefully I will see you all again next week sometime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa.
Fun.